All right, now before we put these guys into the bath, which is just a container I rigged that is filled with a tarp, you want to make sure that they're stacked properly. So there's 2 reinforcement rings there, and in between each board are 2 reinforcement rings. This is to make sure just you get proper water distribution throughout and everything gets soaked, and we'll leave them in there for about a day. Now we fill this until it is above everything, and as you see, I like to use 2 bricks to counteract the buoyancy of the wood, and these are just wrapped in shopping bags as to not damage the surfaces of any of the boards. Now you just cover it up with whatever cover. You could use plywood or whatever, or just the tarp itself. I like to keep a couple bricks on it just in case. Keep it cool from the sun. You leave it in there for about a day. After a day, they'll be fully saturated and ready for the bending process. I wouldn't leave them in there for any more than 2 days for fear of them to start to get moldy or perhaps decomposing the wood itself. And come and check on it every 6 to 8 hours, especially when it's the first interim of the soaking, just because they're going to suck up a lot of this water and the water level will drop, and you want to raise it back up to above. After a while, that shouldn't be a problem, but just keep an eye on it. Make sure the water level is above the wood. So now that the boards are done soaking, I have them inside of the steamer slash boiler, which I have just made out of some ductwork, some construction adhesive, and a heating element from a water heater. I have that plugged in. They'll be in there as it comes up to temperature after about 2 hours. And then once it's at temperature, I'll leave them in there for about 30 minutes to an hour before I bend them. As you'll see, I bend the reinforcement rings inside of some shell cutoffs here and clamp them in that way. And then I bend the drums themselves around these forms here. I'll go over the form construction and how they work in another video, but essentially you clamp the board in here, clamp these together, bend it around, put another one on, clamp it, bend it around, put another one on, clamp it, all the way around until you reach the scarf joint. And then you have yourself a drum ready to be glued after it's dried. I let them dry for usually anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, depending upon the type of wood. All right, now I'm going to show you the process of gluing these up. First, we take them off of the bending forms. As you can see, after they've dried, they hold their shape pretty darn well. And these are just some cherry ones that I had done off camera just to show. But then we remove the bending form, which is actually a bit shallower than the gluing form, just so if there's any play coming back off of that bend, that the shallowness of the bending form can account for that. We're gonna go around and we're gonna clamp it down tight to this form with these, the same that we used to bend it. But the gluing forms and the bending forms are different. This one is put under a lot less stress as to not warp it, and so the shell comes out round and doesn't have any inconsistencies in it. I do use the same bending blocks for the outside, just because all they're doing is putting pressure onto the shell to get it to fit snugly against the gluing form. I've got a bit of plastic, as you see, underneath the scarf joint, so it doesn't glue itself to the form. And also on the scarf joint itself, I have these gluing blocks. I don't cut the outer scarf joint. I actually glue it down, and then I sand it flush after the fact, which you'll be seeing later. So let's glue this one up, get it done, and I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. So as you've seen, or at least as I've tried to show you, just being one man with an iPhone, I start on one side, the side of the inner scarf joint, and work my way around thusly on the top and the bottom. This assures that it stays as flush and as snug as possible to the gluing form. Once I get to about here, I open it up on this side, stick a guy in, and that's when I will apply glue to the scarf joint, and then I will finish clamping, and I'll show you the results when that's finished. So as you can see, it's tight to the form all the way around, clamped in place on the scarf there. You can get an okay look at it. We'll get a better look at it when it dries and we're unclamped. And then I just take a wet rag and wipe off any excess squeeze out that comes. Now we let this dry, and then you just repeat this process with as many drums as you have to glue up. So now with the scarf joint dried, it's time to get this thing off the form, and the first thing to do is remove these screws. The screws unscrewed, I will go in here with this chisel with the handle taken off just so it can fit inside of these forms. Go in between this top ring and these middle rings and pry it off. I can't do it with one hand, so I'll come back to you in a second. So we remove this. With it removed, you can see that this form has been designed with these channels in it, and then the upper and lower rings. And what this allows me to do is to pinch these together and pull the shell up off the form without too much work and without it ever really getting stuck. And if it ever is super stuck, you can always remove the bottom ring as well, and these will just fall out and you'll have yourself your shell. For this shell, I did have to take off the bottom ring just because of its depth, but after that's done, it just comes right out. We remove the plastic. We'll remove all of this excess glue on the lathe, and I'll show you how I deal with the outer scarf joint. But for now, we've got our basic shell. So the first thing I do to clean up the scarf joint is to take the shell, put it on the sanding disc here, and just get both sides absolutely flush and flat. I also have a 13 7/8 template here cut out just to make sure that that is lined up exactly perfect. Just to double check and make sure it's flat and will be exactly 90 degrees to the sanding disc, I double check it here on this wet sanded granite slab. With the table back on the Shopsmith here, I just make sure that it is exactly 90 degrees to the sanding disc. And then we sand the outer scarf joint. And that is the rough shaping of the outer scarf joint. It will be cleaned up on the lathe. And now we're just going to put this on the table saw and cut it down to depth. Now I'm going to clean up this inside scarf joint and all the glue squeeze out first on the oscillating spindle sander. Next, we're just going to pop it on the lathe here with a Longworth chuck that I have fabricated for these drums, and just get the insides nice and sanded for the reinforcement ring gluing process.